I beg your pardon. I never promised you a rose garden. Along with the sunshine, there's got to be a little rain sometime. A hit song by Lynn Anderson, and that's why he referenced you as a Lynn Anderson look-alike, and it's a compliment. A little joke that went on between services, between John Petrell and Ellen there. But anyway, it was a hit song by Lynn Anderson, and I'm sure many of you will have that tune in your head for the rest of the day. You're welcome. I know I've been all week long, that tune's been going in my head. It was a popular song, and through a series of cliches and sayings, she made up a really good point about a relationship. You know, it won't be a rose garden, there's going to be some rain sometime. And lines like, you better look before you leap, still waters run deep, and there won't always be someone there to pull you out. And you know what I'm talking about. At first, putting these sayings together, you pause, but ponder it, and it makes sense, communicating a strong message. Now, if the church at Smyrna had a theme song for its letter, this is the one that I would pick. I never promised you a rose garden. There's got to be a little rain sometime. It reminds me of the relationships. Again, they're not going to be perfect. And for Smyrna, they had this simple truth to face. As a church, you can be doing the right thing, and it can still be hard. This applies to people as well. And so I want to look at this church and get some perspective from our friend Tom. Owns the best auto repair and body shop in Doe Run in East Texas, the best one in 5 counties, and see what it means for us today. Now, cities have reputations. Could be based on some attractions that are there, their way of life, their outlook, their personality. In fact, and actually, Anita sent me one last fall. This fellow did a series of little YouTube clips. He now has them all together, about 5 minutes, and it's worth seeing. It's really funny, about the cities of Texas. If each one had a dress code. And so, for Dallas, it comes up, and he's in a suit, and it's singing, money, money, money. And then for Fort Worth, we see a cowboy, and we hear Dwight Yoakam, and guitars, Cadillacs, hillbilly music. And then for Austin, we see this hipster and some song being played. So cities, communities have reputations. Back in Georgia, the joke was, in Atlanta, they'll ask you how much money you make. In Macon, they'll ask you where you go to church. In Augusta, they'll ask you your grandmother's maiden name. But in Savannah, they'll ask you whether you have a drink. Again, city's reputation. Smyrna was known as the beauty of Asia. It was the number 2 city behind Ephesus. I mean, that was the big city of the area, the sort of central point. And so it would make sense for the first letter to go there based on geography, and I also think based on their particular need. Also, that it would make sense for Smyrna to be the next church address. The beauty of Asia. It was a wealthy city, and it was a powerful place for emperor worship. Increasingly, you're going to have these times where people are called to officially worship the emperor. Now, usually that would mean just go to the temple and you do put a little incense, say nice things about the emperor. You could have your fingers crossed behind your back. And what you did after that in terms of worship was okay. But you officially had to do that. And if you don't, there's troubles. Now, the Christians, they have letters saying, honor the emperor, show respect to the emperor, be a good citizen, but we will only worship Jesus Christ. And so that's what a trouble that they will have. And for this congregation, there's getting some sort of tension, mockery, or some hardships are coming from those in the synagogue. Now, sounds as descriptions here is it's more cultural Jews versus kind of faithful Jews. And also keep in mind, it's very hard to think about in light of centuries of anti-Semitism, but in those first couple hundred years, the Jewish people are picking on the Christians. The tables get turned pretty big time later, but at this point, they're being persecuted or challenged or mocked. Also, they feel like they are poor. Even though, it's in a wealthy city, and they feel poor, just not as sophisticated as those around them, less polished. And so they can easily get caught in that comparison trap. Remember Ephesus, the big city, with a very strong church there. In fact, in the letter to the section to the church at Ephesus, it talks about all the good things that they're doing. Their challenges are behind the scenes. Now, Smyrna is going from Smyrna to Ephesus would be like taking the interstate and expressways from Mesquite to Frisco. Okay, so from that kind of distance, if they're looking good, that's all you're seeing. And, Smyrna's going, we're just Smyrna. We're not as good as Ephesus. Feeling very poor and down upon. So you've got persecution coming from outside, and their perception, they're beating up on themselves a little bit on the inside. Now, in these letters, there are 7 letters to the cities, and there is a pattern. One is a positive affirmation, then a corrective discipline, and then motivating praise. Now, at least one church does not get any affirmation at all. They got troubles, real troubles. Smyrna is one of the 2 cities that get no corrective discipline. They get encouraged. You could call that a correction, saying, look, you got something going for you. You're doing better than you think. In that sense, it's a correction, but there's no sense of you better stop doing anything. It's more, start looking at what you have. And Jesus gives them their identity, saying, I'm the first, the last, the one who was dead and is now alive. Look at the fine things you've got. I'm the one making that word. Don't look to those outside. Don't look to those with the nicer cars telling you about yourself. You look to me, Jesus, for your identity. Now again, we talk about my friend Tom and Run, and he's lived there almost all of his life. He's very familiar with the town, the churches, the people, both there in the county and in the surrounding counties. He's just been around the block several times. He knows things, and he can think of the church of Smyrna, and churches come to mind. Those that are serving in a community has changed, but they're still faithfully serving. They don't think that much of themselves, but they're doing something. They're being faithful where they are. One day, a pastor came over from the Presbyterian church in Metter. It's actually the other Presbyterian church. That town was big enough, they supported 2 Presbyterian churches, but small enough that it was kind of clear that's the first church and that one's not. And the pastor from the church, other church, Presbyterian church in Metter, we'll call him Edwin, he's there, and he was feeling a little discouraged. Now, he really had car problems, but got in a conversation. And they'd been at a Presbyterian meeting. Tom was representing the Presbyterian church in Doe Run as a ruling elder. And just saying, we just can't compete. And mentioning the larger churches in the Presbytery. And Tom says, well, look at where you are. I said, you're on a main road. There are a lot of people coming through town. That's the place they stop. Coming through travel. Maybe on a Sunday, that's where they come to worship. You're got 2 big neighborhoods on either side. You're serving over there. No one else is really serving your part of town. You've got something going on there. And then he reminded Pastor Edwin that, I inherited the auto repair business from my father, that business that he had going. And it was good, but it was small. My father was a good man. But he didn't really have vision for expanding the work. And so there it is. I had the auto repair. Now, I knew there were places, they had more equipment than I did, and they could do a flashier job. I knew go to other communities what was there. But I worked hard at doing what I had. We gave good service, fair price. People wanted to come back. I set aside some money. I bought some more equipment. We were able to do more things, and we kept doing them. Saved some more money. I bought something else. Gradually, I built this up. And eventually, I was able to expand to body work as well. There were tough times in all of that. But I started with what I had. He reminded Pastor Edwin of the old term. That's his red wagon. You ride your red wagon. In that sense, look at what you've got. Look at the good that you're doing, and you focus on that. You're not that bad off. And about a month later, Presbyterian Children's Home get a gift in honor of Tom. And he gets a letter that an anonymous gift has been given in his honor. And like I said last week, Tom's got the best agent, development officer for the Presbyterian homes. And they don't even know it. What does this mean for us? Well, it's a reminder that you can be faithful, doing what is right, and suffering will still happen. You can be right smack dab in the middle of the will of God, and things aren't good around you. Now, I know that at times you make a poor choice, and you will have consequences, and you kind of brought that on yourself. And God's grace is there for you in the middle of it. But sometimes you can be doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and it's not right. And it might be a case of being misunderstood, or being mocked, or even mudslinging. Think of churches serving in tough places, or maybe you have a ministry house in the church that not everybody in the community understands. On a dramatic scale, you've got the church in China. The missionaries kicked out in 1949. And the church had, in many respects, go underground. Great persecution during the Cultural Revolution. But now it's emerged. The church in China is strong. It's growing. It's more stronger than ever. It's an area where it's growing at the cutting edge. There's a fellow, he's with a small Mideast Protestant denomination that's in partnership with the Presbyterian Church USA. Sasan Tabathali, he's based out of Atlanta. He's Iranian, and so he's an Iranian Christian. And he cannot go back to Iran because he converted. But he does go up to Finland. There's a place he goes there. He records Bible studies in Farsi. He can go to the United Arab Emirates, and Iranians can come over and they could have a Christian conference. And he says, it is amazing how the underground church has grown in Iran. Again, we can beam in Bible studies and worship services. So there are more Christians in Iran now than there were when Ayatollah Khomeini returned. I was thinking 78, 79 is the thing of the embassy, so 79, 78 period. There are more Christians there now. It is a persecuted church, but they are growing. The story of the church at Smyrna is a challenge to something out there called prosperity gospel. And some of you have heard it. It's that to name it and claim it, the sense that, oh, I'm blessed, therefore people need to see my expensive watch and my nice car and my nice suit. It shows that I'm blessed. And the idea that if you do certain things, you plant the seed of faith, which is usually the check to the pastor, that God is obligated to bless you. But I remember hearing someone on TV just saying, you plant that, God will bless you. And I wanted to throw something at the television, but they're expensive, you know. So I resisted the temptation to do that. I just said a few words that shouldn't be said right here. It's nonsense. This is a challenge. This was a church doing it right and still had their challenges, and they were okay. And a reminder to us about focusing on our own red wagon, in a manner of speaking. The basic principle of be faithful with what you have, what you've got in front of you. I do to avoid the comparison trap. Now, it's one thing to study, what's this church doing? Is that something that we can adapt? Are there best practices out there? Oh, they've engaged in this, they've got this education program or this mission, it's getting good results. Maybe we should do that too. That's okay, looking at best practices.